listeners, welcome to SWAM online lecture series on the topic Database Management System. Myself, Mohammad Bukhari, working as a professor, AMU, Aligarh Muslim University, in the Department of Computer Science. I am pleased to have you join me today as we explore the fascinating realm of database and database management system. In the few next minutes, we will discuss about our mandatory access control. Previously, I have discussed about the data security, authentication, authorizations. So today I will discuss in detail about the mandatory access control. Mandatory access control is the model to provide also you can say how you will save the data, how unauthorized person cannot access data, to whom you will give the privilege. It means each possible intent is categorized under the special category. You can see here the diagrammatic representation. You can see the home is there, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. If this will be stored like a hierarchy. There are low level, middle level, high level. So then you are able to enter that. The object is there, data is entered here, and anyone authorized person can enter as per privilege given. Some users has given only read, someone using write, for someone using a modification also same way. System works on a criteria defined by system administrator. So the system administrator, the owner will give a privilege for that. So we'll go on details. Going to discuss. In the previous, I have discussed discretionary access control based on granting and revoking privilege. Types of discretionary, I have discussed what type of discretionary privilege. I have labels. It means read, write, modifications you can do, schema design, whatever. Specifying privilege using views. Revoking privilege, I've already explained. In the previous lecture, I have this. So before going to today's agenda, I would like to explain the answer which I have given a question in the previous sessions. The first question was, what is discretionary access control? Discretionary access control that allows user to control access to their own resources. In DAC, owner of the resource have the discretion to grant or revoke the access permissions to other users or entries based on their own judgment. Access decisions are typically based on user identifiers, on user identities, group members, or other attributes, providing flexibility but potentially lead to inconsistent enforcement of security policies. Next question was, what are the privileges in the context of DAC? In the context of discretionary access control, privileges refers to a specific permissions on right granted to users or entities by the owner of resources. These privileges determine the actions that users are allowed to perform on the resource, such as read, write, execute, or delete. Owner can assign privilege to individual users or groups based on their discretion, controlling access to sensitive data or functionalities. The last question was, How does DAC handle the revocation of privilege? In DAC, the revocation of privileges involve the removal of access right previously granted to user or entities by the resource owner. The owner can revoke privilege by modifying the access control list associated with the resources, removing the entry, granting a specific privilege to the user or group. Once privileges are revoked, user lost the corresponding access right to the resources. Explain the process of granting privilege in DAC. In DSE, the process of granting privilege involves the resource owner explicitly assigning access right to specific users or group. Owner typically use access control list to specify the permission granted to each user or group. Once granted, users gain the corresponding privilege to access the resource based on the permission assigned to them. So the agenda of today is to discuss about the MAC, Mandatory Access Control. Advantage of Mandatory Access Control System. The next will be disadvantage of a Mandatory Access Control System. Why is Mandatory Access Control is used? Who is Mandatory Access Control used? It means how is Mandatory Access Control used? Basic principle of Mandatory Access Control. And then the last is difference between MAC and DAC. Come one by one. Mandatory Access Control is a system to allow or deny access to private information in an organization. MAC, different from other system, is that it works on a hierarchy pattern. So MAC is a system, in other words, we can say that MAC is a model which provides, so it will based on hierarchy pattern. It means like a tree structures. It will store like a tree structure in the, you can say, top level, and the top level contains all the attributes, all the facility that, and the next level is a subset for that. It contains less. Here under this system, the whole team force must be divided into category according to the role and responsibility. According to the information they must be allowed to see. Some users have only can retrieve information. Some only can see. Someone can modify. So such depending on that you have to make that happen. Administrator, there are some administration need to put a lot of efforts, time to planning of information flow property. So for that we have the administrator have to spend a lot of efforts for the flow properly. See, the advantage are for MAC, mandatory access control, are advantage high level data protections. This is centralized informations are there, and the privacy. You have to maintain the privacy, sensitive data. You have to save the data from unauthorized person. For the thefts, you can say breaches, data breaches. You will not lose the trust of the customer also, organization also. Centralized information, it means the process at the time of processing, at the modification, at the time of modification also. Suppose some data will be modified from the storage, but the if persons, you can say the unauthorized person cannot retrieve a data which you have deleted from the storage place. So it will not be recovered. So here the high speed data protection, it means By that you can retrieve easily. You can retrieve data very fast. So we will discuss one by one. High level data protection. High level data protection contain most secure among rules, mandatory and discretionary systems. It means what is the role of among the roles that different person have a different roles. Depending on the role of the users, you have to give a permission to retrieve for that. With Mac, one can show that their most confidential data is well protected and leave no room for any leakage. No, you can say, no thefts can be done throughout its life cycle. Centralized information, it means once data is set in a category, it cannot be decentralized by anyone other than the head administrator. Only head administrator can decentralize or centralized. The action taken by the administrator will be the final. This makes the whole system centralized and under the control of only one authority. Privacy means data is set manually by the administrator. No one other than administrator can make changes in a category. It means the administrator are responsible for the privacy of sensitive data. Then come to the, also it has, everything has an advantage, disadvantage. So the advantages for Mac is that careful setting up the process. Carefully you have to set the process. If there are some leakages there, whole your sensitive data will be theft by unauthorized person. So carefully set up a process. The next is regular update requirement. Updation regularly will be updated. Sometimes the user give you have permission to read. Sometimes depending on the requirement, you may write also, retrieval may be given. Sometimes users can give permission only see the data for that. So regular update is required. Lack of flexibility. By that, he has a lack of flexibility. So we will explain one by one. Careful setting means Mac must set up with a good care, otherwise it will make a working chaos. It is become a piece of information needed to be shared among the on workers in the same organization, but Mac restrict anyone to do. Regular update means it requires regular update when new data is added or old data is deleted. At that time, updation should be needed. Administration is required to put some consideration into Mac system and SCA list now and then. Depending on that, you can update. Lack of flexibility means Mac system is not operationally flexible. Then we have to know why is mandatory access control used. The MAC is the important method of data access control. Is used to protect information which is compromised or lost. Many causes damage. If some will be losses, it will damage the organization, damage the reputation of organization, or so data must be more secure. This information may be private, sensitive, confidential, or restricted. Example include the following: trade secrets, blueprints, strategies or merger and acquisition plan, intellectual property. These are that. So you have to useful for that. MAC is also useful for that. Personally identifiable information, financial information and transactions, protected health information, customer information. So all things you have to consider. It must be secure, and unauthorized person are not able to read for that. How is mandatory access control used? So it will be used by government, military facilities are there, mandatory. So here you can see on the screen that imply in the government or military facilities, mandatory access control works for assigning classification label to each file system objects. Users and object system objects are there. For that, you have to each file system object. In addition, each user is assigned a security or clearance level. They may access the objects resources only if their security level is equal or greater than the resource classification level. It may restrict or confidential. So if it is there, you can read for that. When a person or device is tried to access a specific resources, okay, so MAC is the most secure access control setting variables. It requires careful planning, continuous monitoring to keep all the resource object and the user classification up to date. It means you have to make update the users and all the resource object update. To whom you have to logs, you have to maintain the logs also, and you have to do. So you have to know all these things. Mandatory access control is used for all the resource object and the users. Then come to a basic principle of mandatory access control. So here we'll discuss about the one principle in the MAC is always centrally managed by the administrator. It is always managed by an administrator. The person is responsible for setting security clearance for the users and security level of the resources. It means MAC is used for several principles. When followed, help control access to data, protect data, and maintain its confidentiality, integrity, and availability also. Another principle is that users only uses the resources which can have been granted clearance. User cannot make changes of their permission or clearance level. No user can grant privilege to other user or change of MAC rules. So you have to follow the no users can grant privilege to other users, cannot transfer that. Okay. So these are security levels we have to do. They also cannot access, edit someone else's information without explicit permission to do. The one user who has no permission to edit, so he cannot edit or access someone else's information without permission. So these are the basic principle that the some key components of mandatory access control system. What are the components? There are 4 components. I will have 4. First is security level, security policy, security level management, and security information mechanism. Security level, it means you have to provide the security for that. Security policy, you have to define the security policy depending the role of a users for the organization also. Security level management, also you have to management, the administrator, the owner can manage the security levels also. Security information mechanism also you have to do. There are the 4 key components for mandatory. We'll discuss one by one. In the security level, you have to do, there are 5 steps: sensitivity level, categories level, and the assignment to database objects, and the database, and then assignment to users. So assignment the user and database objects. So assignment the users are the users, the accountant, those objects are there, the action you read, write, update, modify, whatever. Information of access control, you have to enforce for access control. These are security level, the 4 level. First is sensitive level, next is category level, and the next assignment of database objects. Then after assignment for user, the both are same, and the information of access control. The next is security level. Then after is the security level. Security policy, we have to define what is the objective. First of all, you have to find out what is the objective for security, why you want to security, and the scope and the access control. And data classification, dependent, you have to classify the data. Then encryption and data protection. Here, for the security world, you have to encrypt the data by the encryption techniques. By efficient techniques are there, the algorithms there. By that, you have to encrypt data so that unauthorized person cannot access. For this is also very useful for the data transmission. Online transmission is there. Block cipher is there. Steam cipher. If online, the steam cipher is there. So security controls, you have to do also security controls. Then the next is security level management. In the security management also have a 4 steps. Level assignment, you have to level assignments. Level maintenance, you have to maintain the levels. Maintenance, you have to enforcement, level enforcement, and last is propagations. So in security level, you have to manage for that. Security enforcement mechanism. Security enforcement mechanism, access control decision logics, then authentication. Authentication is very important. You have to authenticate the users is by using password, subtoken, fingerprints, like that you can authenticate to use the objects user. Authorization, you can authorize to use the objects. Security level enforcement, you have to, there are 4 types of, and then encryption also is there, and intrusion detection and prevention. There are the 5 steps. You may have 6 steps you have to find for security enforcement mechanism. First is access control decision logic you have to develop. Then authentication, already explained in the previous. Authorization, already I have explained in the previous lecture. Security level enforcement, encryptions, also I have explained the encryption to protect data, to convert data in such a way that unauthorized person are not able to retrieve. If they are able to retrieve, at that time the value of information will be 0. You can useless for the organization, whatever. Then you have to discuss what are the difference between DAC and MAC, DAC and MAC. I have given some, you can say some on the screen, you can see DAC. DAC stands for discretionary access control. DAC is easier to implement. MAC is difficult to implement. DAC is less secure to use. MAC is more secure to use. In DAC, this discretionary access control is less secure. Unauthorized person can tap the users, you can say profiles, whatever. MAC is more secure. In DAC, the owner can determine the access and privilege and can restrict the resources based on the identity of the users. In MAC, the system only determines the access and the resources will be restricted based on the clearance of the subjects. Okay, these are about the DAC. Then in the next, that's as you can see the MAC. MAC stands for mandatory access control. MAC is difficult to implement. It will be difficult to implement. MAC is more secure to use. In MAC, system only determines the access and resources will be restricted based on the clearance of all the subjects. So these are about the difference between DAC and MAC. We have prepared some straightforward questions for your home assignment depending on the lectures. These questions designed in such a way that it will help for solidify your understanding. So see the assignment on the screen. Explain mandatory access control. Describe usage of MAC. Next question, what is the advantage of MAC? In our exploration, I have tried to explain the security levels and investigate the intricate world of MAC. I hope you enjoyed this exploration. Thank you once again for your active participations.